This program contains graphic material, including offensive language. Viewer discretion is advised. Ceres, California, a small town located in the Central Valley near Modesto. January 9th, 2005. A security camera captures a gunman ambushing two police officers at a liquor store. The gunman steps side to side in a semicircle pattern. It's a textbook military shooting technique called slicing the pie.
That's basically going out on an angle. He aggresses through the target, pushing them back.
Before the night was over, one police officer would be killed and another critically injured. Police will learn that the shooter, Andres Raya, is a member of one of California's largest gangs. But what they discover next will shock them all.
When I found out that Raya had been in the Marine Corps, I was at disbelief. You know, there's no way. Marines don't do this.
Gangs. They're in our streets, our cities, even our small towns. Now, they're in our armed forces.
We do have all type of gangs in the military, from MS-13, 18th Street, Crips and Bloods, even Hell's Angels have been reported in the military.
The Department of Defense says they are dealing with the problem. Experts beg to differ.
In my opinion, it's growing, and it's growing at an alarming rate.
There is an attrition in Iraq. The military is under pressure to refill those spots with bodies. The recruiters have pressures.
Gangland explores a controversial subject that goes straight to the heart of our national security. The United States Armed Forces. It's the most powerful military on the planet, with more than 2.5 million active and reserve members. All have sworn to protect and defend the United States against every enemy, foreign and domestic. And every day, the vast majority of soldiers do just that. Yet evidence suggests that our military forces are being compromised by some of the worst criminal elements our country has ever known. Street gangs. In 2007, an FBI report entitled "Gang-Related Activity in the U.S. Armed Forces Increasing" was released to local law enforcement. One of the report's findings was that members of nearly every major street gang had been identified on U.S. military installations. Al Valdez is a gang consultant to the U.S. Department of Justice and a 28-year veteran in law enforcement.
We have skinheads in the military, extremists in the military. We have Bloods and Crips and Sureño gang members in Marine bases and Army bases as well. So every branch in the military has gangs.
According to gang expert and retired Army Sergeant Hunter Glass, gangbangers value loyalty over life. Only their loyalty is to the gang, not to Uncle Sam.
The American gangster, you know, he's bound by blood. He has a code he lives by. I mean, these guys are willing to die for it. It's like a religion composed around violence.
This video shows enlisted men flashing gang hand signs at a nightclub located on an Army base. The FBI report cited gang crimes on military facilities that included drive-by shootings, assaults, robberies, vandalism, extortion, and money laundering.
What happens in the civilian world also happens in the military world, and they experience the whole gamut of gang crimes.
The FBI report also cited crimes committed by military gang members as far away as Germany.
We are seeing a globalization of gangs around the world. The military bases would be an easy facilitator of that. We now see Crips in places like Tokyo, Japan, and Germany, and, Latin kings in the streets of Madrid, Spain.
Army National Guard Sergeant Jeffrey Stolison captured gang graffiti on or near military bases while on tour in Iraq in 2006.
The reasoning behind why I documented the graffiti throughout the theater of Iraq, was to present an overall picture of what street gangs were within the military ranks. The graffiti that was overseas revolved around the known street gangs within the cities of the United States. I had graffiti that I was able to identify from Black Kings, Black Gangster Disciples, Norteños, Vice Lord.
The FBI report surmised that the problem may ultimately put our national security at risk.
Hey, when they're on foreign soil and they act out, no one sees the fact that he's a gang member. The only thing they see is that he's a soldier. This could be clearly detrimental to foreign policy as well as security.
The Department of Defense admits there are gang members in the military. They say they are carefully monitoring gang activity, but they contend it is not a major problem.
The DoD's response, of course, was that the FBI report might be a little overblown. They decided that it was not as strong or as big a problem as the FBI reported it to be.
Nobody knows for sure how many gang members are in active duty or reserve status in our military. We have no standard definition in the country that everybody works by.
Without question, the vast majority of enlisted men and women serve the United States with honor and integrity.
You know, 99% of our guys and gals I'd go to battle with them anytime, anywhere.
Experts suggest that less than 1% of our military troops are active gang members. Although there are no concrete numbers available, some gang experts believe that this could translate to thousands of soldiers. As former Army criminal investigator Carter Smith points out, that's the equivalent of a large military base.
Let's say 10,000, because 10,000 is less than 1% of the military. It takes a really large army base to have 10,000 soldiers on it. Really large. Like, there's only a few above 10,000. So we're talking about an entire army base worth of gangbangers distributed throughout the military.
The Pentagon did not respond to repeated requests for interviews for this program. However, former DoD investigator Scott Barfield agreed to talk.
A lot of it is denial. If they can just honestly deny it, just pretend it doesn't exist, and they're okay.
A former military police officer also agreed to talk, providing his identity remain anonymous.
Gang members and extremists, they pose a clear and present danger to our armed forces and the military way of life. Bottom line.
T.J. Lydon agrees. He's a former Marine and a former skinhead.
I was involved in the skinhead movement before I became a Marine. And while I was in the United States Marine Corps, my involvement escalated.
Lydon first joined the skinheads in the early 1980s while growing up in Southern California. At first, it was just a way to fit in.
We would say we were racist, but we really didn't know what the term meant. It was just something to belong to, something to hold on to.
But as Lydon got more involved, he began to internalize the skinhead teachings.
If you're not white, then you're subhuman. You don't have the right to exist or to live. So the basic goal is to eliminate them all through either genocide or just basically sterilization, so they can't reproduce.
By the time Lydon was 15 years old, he was fighting other gangs. At age 21, he was in trouble with the law. So in 1988, he decided to join the Marines.
I figured, dang, you know, not only am I going to go in and learn combat skills, but I'm going to get paid to do it. So why not?
Lydon was sent to basic training in San Diego. He was then stationed in Hawaii at Kaneohe Bay. Along the way, he says he found other extremists.
While I was in the Marine Corps, I started recruiting active duty military personnel to join the White Power movement.
The Pentagon's policy has been that gang members can join the military as long as they are passive members in their gang. What constitutes passive is up to individual commanders.
I actively walked around as a skinhead. I had my boots, my braces, White Power t-shirts. I had SS bolts that were 2 inches high tattooed on my neck. I was not in any way, shape, or form afraid of who I was, nor did I hide it.
Lydon says he was a fully active skinhead, flaunting his racist beliefs.
My allegiance was solely to my race and my gang. You didn't find in my barracks room a flag from the United States of America. You saw a swastika. You saw a Confederate battle flag. I had all my racist tattoos and racist paraphernalia everywhere.
For Lydon, basic training was like going to school and getting a degree for his gang.
The Marines taught me organizational skills, leadership ability, and recruitment techniques.
Experts believe that having access to that kind of training is one reason gangsters join the military. The average military contract is approximately 4 years. When service members leave, they take their knowledge with them. In a gangster's case, it goes back to the hood.
You can take almost every job in the military, and it's going to have some sort of benefit to a gang member on the street.
We end up teaching people how to do home invasions. We end up teaching people how to do ambushes.
That danger is translated back to local communities and the police who patrol them. The FBI report warns that gang-related activity in the U.S. military is increasing and poses a threat to law enforcement officials. It's a nightmare proposition for police officers. In some cases, they're going toe-to-toe with gangbangers whose combat training is more specialized than theirs.
If a policeman contacts a gang member with prior military experience, the policeman's going to lose. Not because he's weak, not because he's not prepared, because he's not trained to deal with military style of fighting.
That's what happened in January 2005. When a Marine Lance Corporal ambushed John King and 3 other California police officers.
I don't think that the Marine Corps had ever intended to send any REA to Ceres, California and ambush police officers. That's not what they trained him for.
It is a problem unlike any other the U.S. military is facing. Gang experts estimate that thousands of active gang members have infiltrated the armed services, some with the intent of using their training back on the streets. A 2007 FBI report concluded that gang members could use their military training against law enforcement officials and rival gang members.
We got the best combat gear in the world. Weapons, night vision goggles, high-end flak vests. It's going to be floating around on the streets.
The FBI further warned that gang members trained by the military could ultimately result in more organized, sophisticated, and deadly gangs.
You've been taught leadership and you've taught whatever trade you went in there to learn, and you have it now. You can replicate. You can clone yourself. You can spread that cancer throughout your community, your city, your state.
Ceres, California, a small town located in the Central Valley near Modesto, felt the effects of military training being used for the wrong reasons. January 9th, 2005. On a cold, rainy night, 911 operators received a distress call from George's liquor store. A clerk reported that a man entered the store, claiming he had been shot at. He was acting strangely and carrying a gun. Ceres police officers Sam Rhino, Chris Melton, and John King were dispatched to the scene.
This call just didn't give me a very good feeling. I went ahead and took my rifle out of the rack, and I had it in my lap, ready to go. That probably turned out to be the best decision I ever made.
As captured on security cameras, officers Rhino and Melton arrived first. They cautiously worked their way to the plate glass corner of an adjacent store. Sam Rhino peered around the dark corner. He noticed a man wearing a poncho.
They saw each other. I think Sam said something like, "Show me your hands."
The man refused, then pulled out an illegally converted, fully automatic SKS assault rifle.
He stepped behind the wall, pulled his poncho up over his shoulder, pulled his rifle out, came around the corner shooting.
The plate glass window shattered. Officer Rhino fell to the ground. The shooter methodically closed in on the officers, Rhino was shot 4 times in the legs and abdomen. Officer Melton tried to pull Rhino to safety.
The officers were incredibly overwhelmed by this one guy. It wasn't that he was a Superman. He just had superior firepower and tactics on his side.
The gunman moved forward with precision, continually stepping side to side in a half-circle formation. It's a tactic taught by the Marines called slicing the pie. It's believed that's where the shooter, 19-year-old Lance Corporal Andres Raya, learned the technique.
Raya utilized very dynamic tactics, the way he moved in, the way he aggressed his targets.
Cameras captured another squad car arriving on the scene. It was 33-year-old Officer John King. King had been an Army sergeant based at Fort Bragg and quickly realized what was happening.
You know, my police academy didn't prepare me for this type of an ambush. This was a military-style ambush, and the way you win an ambush is you fight into it, and you have to overcome their firepower with superior firepower.
King unloaded round after round, forcing Raya to retreat behind the building.
I took that opportunity to talk to Officer Rhino, and I asked him, are you hit? And he said that he was. And I asked him, can you walk? Can you get yourself out of here? He said no. I could see blood. You can smell that kind of that metallic smell of blood. I could smell that everywhere.
Just then, 15 yards out of the camera's coverage area, Sergeant Howard Stevenson, a veteran officer, pulled into the opposite end of the parking lot. Officer King could not see Stevenson, but Raya could.
He immediately started to shoot at Sergeant Stevenson before he could even get out of the car.
Raya's armor-piercing bullets easily penetrated the windows of an empty car, striking the sergeant just outside of the camera's view. Using a military technique called suppression fire, Raya unloaded his rifle while continually advancing towards Stevenson. This shooting tactic made it difficult for Stevenson to defend himself. The sergeant fled, but was too injured to reach safety.
Sergeant Stevenson moved around and tried to take cover behind this wall here, but he had already taken some blows, which allowed him to move up on him.
Raya showed no mercy.
He moved up to within 2 or 3 feet and shot him in the head twice at point-blank range with a rifle. Obviously a fatal injury. And he continued on down the street.
Raya slipped into the darkness of the surrounding neighborhood, leaving 1 officer dead and 1 critically injured. But his assault against the Ceres police wasn't over. Since his adolescence, police say Raya had been under the influence of one of California's largest gangs, the Norteños.
We have the 2 major gangs that exist in California, which would be your Norteños and Sureños, Northerners and Southerners. The particular gang that Raya belonged to, they called themselves El Campo because they came out of a little neighborhood called the Camp.
The Norteños began in California's state prison system during the 1960s. Hispanic inmates divided into 2 rival gangs based on geography. Young men who join the Norteños are often too scared to leave.
They're afraid of the things that they're asked to do, but they can't fail because then they may face violence from their own gang members.
It's this environment that produced Andres Raya. The son of Mexican immigrants, Raya grew up in Ceres in a subsidized housing neighborhood. Children from the community recognized the power of the Norteño gang and learned how to flash gang signs by adolescence. Several photos show Raya flashing the Norteño gang signs with friends. As a teenager, Raya dreamed of being a Marine. Immediately following high school graduation in 2003, he joined up. After 6 months of intense training, he was sent to Iraq, where he drove supply trucks. Most sources say he saw little direct combat, though one report suggests he witnessed an IED explosion that caused temporary hearing loss. After a 7-month tour, he returned home with honors. But while back in Ceres, Raya vandalized his former high school.
He couldn't give up the gang mentality, and the gang mentality was there way before the Marine Corps was. And I don't think that's the military's fault.
Army National Guard Sergeant Jeffrey Stolison found evidence of that mentality while serving in Iraq.
Basically here, Norteño put up this graffiti. Now you had a Sereno that came along and, in a sign of disrespect, tagged out Norteño's graffiti and put his own up straight through the team.
Gang experts say this skewed loyalty is typical of gangbangers, and all the military training in the world won't change it.
There are people that will go into prison and it would benefit them to renounce their gang affiliation, and they won't. And they'll stay there for decades. Well, if it doesn't work in prison, basic training isn't going to get it out of you either.
In 2007, an FBI report concluded that gang-related activity in the military is on the rise.
In my opinion, it's growing, and it's growing at an alarming rate because we aren't doing anything.
It's something that needs to be addressed, or it's going to get worse and worse.
The Department of Defense did not respond to repeated requests to interview for this program. There has long been a connection between the military and gangs. Immediately after the Civil War, a group of Confederate soldiers formed what would become a domestic terrorist group, the Ku Klux Klan.
These group of Confederate soldiers said, you know what, let's take our military expertise. We'll put on sheets because they believed that blacks were superstitious and afraid of ghosts. So they would dress like dead Confederate soldiers, and they would go through the countryside. If a black was standing up and being a man, well, they're going to lynch that guy.
War gangs started after World War II.
The restless young men that came back from World War II were looking for outlets, and one thing led to another. It went from the hot rods to the motorcycles, and then from the motorcycles to the more rowdy behavior, and then it just continued on, and the next thing you know, we have groups like the Hells Angels.
They didn't know how to readapt themselves into society, so they became, hellraisers, hellions, on motorcycles, but in a way they had a code of honor.
That code of honor included a respect for the military that lasted through the Korean War. Gang members new to the armed forces were expected to sever their gang ties once inside. That changed in the 1970s during the Vietnam War.
As a result of the draft, we got people off the streets that we might not have allowed in or asked to come in if we were able to be selective like we are between wars.
Post-Vietnam, we see a whole new cadre of gang members and gang leaders developing. They no longer pay attention to their elders. They do whatever they want. Gang members who joined the military tended to keep their gang membership and association active while they were in the military.
Prior to the Vietnam War, there was still, bats, knives, occasional gun. After that, it was all about guns.
After the Vietnam era, we start to see developments in some of the minority communities, such as the Crips and the Bloods.
The problem of gangs in the military surfaced in 1995 when an Army soldier grabbed headlines at Fort Bragg in Fayetteville, North Carolina. This enormous Army installation houses 43,000 soldiers, including elite fighting groups like the 82nd Airborne Division.
When the president dials 911, the phone rings at Fort Bragg.
Journalist Jeff Thompson has worked in Fayetteville's local media since the late 1960s, covering numerous military crimes. But on December 6, 1995, one of those crimes would shock the community.
Fayetteville, by reputation, certainly has had its share of heinous crimes. This counts among the worst.
The evening began with 3 young soldiers from the 82nd Airborne gathered in a trailer. James Burmeister, Malcolm Wright Jr., and Randy Meadows were all in their early 20s. The conversation soon turned to their shared hatred of other ethnic groups. All 3 men were skinheads, an extremist gang with members on base. The gang was a natural fit for Burmeister. He was obsessive about his German heritage and idolized Adolf Hitler. Nazi flags and paraphernalia covered his room.
He had a manual in his barracks on bomb building. He had a swastika hanging from the wall of the room that he rented in a mobile home off post. So he wasn't afraid to exhibit his beliefs.
The military knew what was going on. I think what they wanted to do the most was to hide it. If they pretended like it didn't exist, it would just go away. But it didn't.
As the beer flowed that evening, Burmeister noticed a spiderweb tattoo on Wright's elbow. Wright told him that the tattoo was a skinhead badge of honor, signifying that a gang member had killed a black person.
Wright told him that if he went out and killed a black couple, he'd get an elbow web.
In the hierarchy of the skinheads, Burmeister was at the bottom. Suddenly, he saw a way to move up. The men continued partying. Then they drove to a black neighborhood in downtown Fayetteville.
A group of white males in that neighborhood, that time of night, would only be down there looking for trouble.
It didn't take long to find what they were looking for. An African-American couple walking down the street. Meadows stopped the car. Burmeister and Wright jumped out. The black couple was 27-year-old Jackie Burton and 36-year-old Michael James. Burmeister approached James first and pulled out a 9mm handgun. He fired from 7 feet away.
James was shot first. First bullet grazed his head.
Burmeister then placed the handgun 8 inches from James's head.
Second bullet hit him in the back of the head and killed him instantly.
Jackie Burton tried to escape.
Jackie was trying to run. She turned from him and he shot her in the back. Then Burmeister walked up and shot her 3 times in the head at point-blank range.
In Burmeister's mind, he had earned his spiderweb tattoo, but it turned out Wright's information was incorrect.
An elbow web does not signify a murder of somebody who's a minority. It signifies that you've done time, in jail. Wright didn't know what he was talking about.
Burmeister and Wright were later sentenced to life in prison. Randy Meadows accepted a plea bargain for his testimony. News of the Burmeister crime set off an investigation into extremism on the base at Fort Bragg.
The Army did its investigation at the insistence of the local NAACP. Of course, Secretary of the Army got involved. This thing had national repercussions.
Investigators concluded that 22 soldiers at Fort Bragg had ties to white supremacy groups. The findings prompted the Secretary of the Army to expand the investigation to all Army bases.
Task Force finds that less than 1% of those interviewed report knowing or coming into contact with extremists in uniform. It concludes that extremist activity in and on and touching the United States Army is minimal.
But the task force did uncover a chilling fact.
But there's a bigger problem. Here it is. It's gangs.
The military re-emphasized a policy that forbade enlisted men and women from being associated with supremacist causes or groups that advocated the use of force or violence. But the regulations still in place said nothing about street gangs.
The word gang barely exists in regulatory guidance or training manuals. Barely exists. We've gone over 10 years with nothing that's around that says thou shalt not be in a gang.
The military has yet to really actually come up with a definition of what a gang member is. And until you actually have a good, strong written definition as to what a gang member is, then pretty much you can't really enforce anything.
That leaves it up to individual military bases to decide what's acceptable. As a result, many problems may never be reported.
It's that old adage that what happens in Las Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, what happens on base stays on base.
Regulations do prohibit obscene or inappropriate tattoos, body piercings, throwing hand signs, graffiti, or flying colors. However, having a gang tattoo does not automatically prevent entrance into the armed services.
Gang membership is a protected right under the First Amendment of the Constitution, freedom of association. What prevents you from getting into the military is your criminal history. So if you don't have a criminal history, or your criminal history is misdemeanor or some felonies that you can get waivers on, you can join the military.
Even a history of gangbanging can be overlooked, as long as officials are convinced the recruit has cut ties with the homeboys. Once in boot camp, gangbangers may appear to be loyal to Uncle Sam, but they're often working under false colors.
Gang members' allegiance lies to one thing, and that's to the gang. And it doesn't align with anything else.
Here we see graffiti. This is a picture of MS-13. This graffiti was found in Iraq. Just about all of the bases as a whole, in some way, unfortunately, were tagged up.
They're not here for the red, white, and blue.
The United States military. Each recruit is trained to serve and lead with honor. Some experts estimate that less than 1% of U.S. servicemen and women have gang affiliations. But for those that do, basic training takes on a whole new meaning.
You can start selling drugs. You could be looking for rival gang members. You could be looking for peer gang members or allies. You can be establishing new cliques or sets of your gangs in the military. You can recruit in the military.
You learn how to be a recruiter in the military. You can use those same techniques out there, make you the best salesman in the world.
Whether gangs are on American soil or overseas, membership comes with a price. Kaiserslautern, Germany, July 3rd, 2005. Around 8 p.m., 11 men and 1 woman gathered near this McDonald's restaurant. All were either active duty or former Army and Air Force personnel. They were also all affiliated with the Gangster Disciples, a notoriously violent gang based in Chicago. An hour later, their leader, a former airman, arrived. His name was Rico Williams.
He was a massive individual, well over 6 feet tall, stocky build, big hands, long fingernails, the kind of person that put fear in a lot of people and intimidated people.
Steve Mraz, a reporter for the military publication Stars and Stripes, describes what happened next.
The group arrived here at this pavilion in Honeck in Germany at roughly a little bit after 9 o'clock. They drove down with Rico leading the way in his black Honda. Rico said, "It's time to begin." So they made their way into the pavilion.
Inside the pavilion, 25-year-old Army Sergeant Jawan Johnson was waiting. A soldier with the Army's 66th Transportation Company, Johnson had spent time in Iraq and narrowly survived a landmine explosion. Back in Baltimore, Maryland, his wife Kanika was 4 months pregnant with their first child. Johnson was due to be discharged in a few weeks. But before that happened, he wanted one thing: to be initiated into the Gangster Disciples. And that required sustaining a so-called jump-in.
That involved the gang members beating a hopeful initiate for a certain number of minutes. Once they did that, they were welcomed into the gang.
The gangsters circled around Johnson. Their leader, Rico Williams, entered the center, his 6-foot frame towering down on the 5'3" Johnson.
Rico asked him, "Is this what you want?" Johnson replies, "Hell yeah." Rico rears back with all his might and he strikes Johnson on his left cheek with Rico's right fist. Johnson drops for 30 seconds. 2 people in the circle situated around him have to pick Johnson up, get him to his feet. At that point, he's obviously dazed from the blow from Rico. Rico again asks him, "Is this what you want?" Johnson this time says yes, but by this point already his words are slurred.
Williams threw another powerful punch, and Johnson fell again. This time, he got back up on his own.
At that point in time, the gang members who are circled around here descend on Johnson like a pack of wolves on a piece of meat. And from then, it's just all hell has broken loose.
For 6 long minutes, Johnson endured the beating, slipping in and out of consciousness. At one point, he fell down, curled in the fetal position. Enraged, Williams began kicking him in the chest. But Johnson remained in the circle.
At no point did he try and block the blows. He took this willingly. This was a gang initiation to show that he had the heart to join this gang.
Finally, the clock ran out.
At that point, everyone comes in, gives him a group hug, tells him, "You're in." He survived the 6 minutes. As they close in on him, they can tell that something was horribly wrong. Johnson's breathing was irregular. He just was in very bad shape.
Johnson's new fellow gang members decided not to take him to the hospital. Instead, around 10 p.m., they brought him back to the barracks and assigned a soldier to watch over him. The following morning, July 4th, Johnson was pronounced dead from multiple blunt force injuries. Rico Williams, the gangster disciple leader, fled Germany. Fall 2007, a total of 10 airmen and soldiers were implicated in the beating death of Juwan Johnson. At army bases near Kaiserslautern, 2 gangster disciples were sentenced to jail time and dishonorably discharged from the military. Another gang member was acquitted. Charges have not been filed against the remaining members, including Rico Williams. His whereabouts are unknown. Johnson's death underscores just how high the stakes are in gang life, even for those within the military.
This graffiti is a representation of the Black Disciples, the Chicago-based gang. In it you see the B and the D. You see the 6-point star. This was taken at a military base in Iraq.
America's got to wake up and realize we're not talking about a group of disenchanted youth. We're talking about a subculture that works and operates just like a cult or religion.
According to the FBI report, gang members are present in most branches and across all ranks of the military, but are most common among junior enlisted ranks.
And the reason I feel they're guys that are lower ranks is because they're not in it to make a career and to serve for the country. They're there to get what they want, export it back to the street, and they're gone.
I think some gang members do it to escape their neighborhoods, and then once in, they realize that it's not what they thought it was going to be. So they go back to their allegiances to the gang. I also think that some of their allegiances to the gang are so strong that they can't break the bond once they're in the uniform anyways.
No one joined basic training as a Baptist and came out a Catholic. You can't convert somebody in that respect. You might curtail his behaviors, but that's about it.
I guess you can say it this way. You can take the kid out of the hood, but you can't take the hood out of the kid.
That was true for Norteño's gang member Andres Raya, a Marine Lance Corporal. On January 9th, 2005, he ambushed police officers at a Ceres, California liquor store. Shooting round after round of armor-piercing bullets, he killed one police officer and seriously injured another. Then hid in the darkness of a nearby neighborhood. There, he prepared for his final assault.
He knew something was going to happen. The snare was going to come to a close one way or another.
Ceres, California, January 9th, 2005. Marine Lance Corporal Andres Raya lured police to this local liquor store. Once they arrived, Raya unloaded his assault rifle.
He was shooting an SKS rifle. His version was converted, had an illegal modification on it, which allowed it to shoot fully automatic. It had 30-round capacity magazines, one of which I found laying on the ground here.
Officer John King, a former Army sergeant, used his military training to fight back.
You can still see bullets embedded in the corner there in the steel. If you walk around and look inside of these steel beams here, there's bullet holes in there.
Raya managed to kill a police officer and critically injure another before retreating into the surrounding neighborhoods.
He went into some people's backyard and hid. He sat for a couple hours, long enough for SWAT teams to respond and for them to start their searches, going yard to yard. He knew something was going to happen.
As Raya hid in the darkness, reinforcements from surrounding counties arrived. They cordoned off a square-mile area and searched the neighborhood house by house. A police helicopter focused its spotlight on an alleyway near the liquor store. Suddenly, Raya jumped a backyard fence into the alley.
He chose to jump the fence and charge some more officers that were on a perimeter position. He still had his rifle with him.
Gunfire erupted, but this time, Raya was on the losing end.
He was brought down in the alleyway on the left-hand side over there by the fence. And that was pretty much it. This is where it all ended at.
Raya's rampage ended with his death, but it left behind troubling questions about his dual membership in the military and the Norteños gang.
Andy was one person. That's all he was. Imagine if he had his whole gang with him and he was trained and he was leading these guys through the street. You know, the couple hours they fought with him could have been a couple of days situation. It's a very, very scary thing.
Raya's motive for the shooting is unclear. Some contend it was suicide by cop. Others have suggested that Raya snapped as a result of his service in Iraq.
I took a great offense to that. That's a discredit to every person who's ever served in any branch of the service. To me, Andy Raya was not a Marine. Andy Raya was a Norteño throwing a temper tantrum.
Yet the war in Iraq is believed to be contributing to the military's gang problem in one major way.
There is an attrition in Iraq. The military is under pressure to refill those spots with bodies. So the recruiters have pressures.
Some believe the Army is lowering its standards to meet their annual recruiting goals.
The dropping of standards has happened, it has occurred, we're seeing it, and we know it's happening.
It's a tough job, it's a strenuous job, and these guys want to make quota, and sometimes they'll do what they're going to do to make those numbers.
In 2007, the Army granted 9,000 so-called moral waivers, allowing applicants with past records, including felonies, to join the military. That's 65% higher than 2003, the year the U.S. invaded Iraq.
Some of the waivers are for assault, some of the waivers are for gang-related activities.
Gang members, small in number, blend in among the overwhelming majority of law-abiding soldiers.
They look like the most respectful, sharp-looking soldier, but easy 90% of the gang members in the military are still active, whether they're taking an active role with committing crime or being passive and just soaking in the training.
Many believe that unless the U.S. policies change, the problem will continue to grow.
What scares me is I don't think the military takes it seriously.
That's the ostrich burying the head in the sand. We see a problem, we recognize it's a problem, we don't have a solution, therefore we must go back to number one and say there isn't a problem.
We know that the crime is coming, and it's going to come in waves dealing with people who've been trained by the military. Not intentionally trained by the military, but unfortunately all the same.
In 1996, former skinhead and Marine T.J. Lydon grew tired of the violence and hatred of the skinhead movement. He made a decision to leave the gang. He began speaking out, warning military bases, law enforcement, and anyone who would listen about the dangers of gangs in the military.
The only way to stop it is for me to be actively involved. If you create a mess, the only way to fix a mess is clean it up.
He's not the only one pushing for solutions.
We wholeheartedly believe in our military. This is our military. This is our grandfather's military. We don't need to lose the integrity of what our forefathers have brought before us. It's something that needs to be taken care of. It needs to be taken care of now.
Cancer, if not treated, will kill you. It's not going away by hiding and saying, I don't have cancer.
We'll continue to do this, I feel, until there's change, until we see something that makes it illegal to be a gang member in the military. Then I guess we've won.
Scott Barfield may get his wish. In December 2007, Congress passed new legislation on gangs as part of the 2008 Defense Authorization Bill. If signed into law, it will require the Pentagon to place gang membership on the list of prohibited activities by military personnel. Even so, gang experts agree the problem will take years to address.
So if you're going to send your kid into the military, you better tell him that there's a possibility he may run across gang members even in a United States military uniform. That staff sergeant, that gunny, that captain in the military could be a gang member.